Welcome to the channel. It's been a little while since my last video. This one should be a fairly brief one, I think. It's basically just a summary of what I've been up to the past year or so with this turbocharged 4th generation Civic. So if you've seen the previous video, you'll know that this car did have a D14 A1 dual carb with a turbocharger. The eagle-eyed Honda fans amongst you will now realise that this is not that engine. This is a D16 Z6 with injection, so bit of a change over the past couple of years, and I'll go into why in this video. So the D14 engine I was running previously was the standard engine for this car. Here in the UK, these sedans, so with a boot, only came with one spec level, and that spec level was GL, which came with a 1.4 D14 A1 dual carb. There was no injection options available for this car in the UK. The hatchbacks had a lot more choice, but the saloons or sedans only came with a single spec. Obviously, the D14 engines, not particularly nippy. I think on paper from the factory they were something like 89 horsepower, which is fairly slow. So I decided to turbocharge it. Just for the fun of it, really, more than anything else. Wasn't really expecting any massive amounts of power. Any amount of power increase was a benefit, though. As you can probably guess by the fact that engine is not in the car anymore, that didn't exactly go perfectly. To start with, at least, it was very, very good. Significant more power than standard. Never got it dynoed, so I couldn't say exactly what power figures were. I would have estimated probably 50 horsepower more than it had standard. It was significantly faster, especially at higher speeds. But it didn't last very long. So I think probably from when the turbocharger was first running, to be honest, I would have sort of finished it until it met its demise was about 6 weeks. So really not very long. I've got a solid idea why that happened. I mean, I think if you watched the previous video, there was some pre-warning that this might have happened. Just by the fact that I was running the standard distributor, still running carbs, very, very basic turbo setup with not a lot of control. Yeah, so on the D14 I was running with a standard distributor, which on those engines is just a vacuum advance. Very, very basic speed-based distributor, similar to most carbureted vehicles. To adapt that for a turbo, I basically did nothing. I just wound back the static timing by an amount, about sort of 5 degrees, which in hindsight is the reason that engine failed. From what I could tell with the wideband, fueling was quite good, so I would have thought if the spark timing was more retarded, that engine probably would have lasted a lot longer. Although, even in the best case scenario, the D14 engines aren't renowned for being particularly strong. I think if I had another car with a D14 in it, I would definitely turbocharge it again. I would use some of the learning I've had from this car, though, to sort of make that setup a bit more reliable. I wouldn't switch back to a D14 from this D16. I think the engine setup I've got now is superior to the previous one in pretty much every way. It's injection now, so I've got full control over spark and fueling with a standalone ECU. I think I'll go more into that in a future video, because I feel like that warrants a video by itself, because I know a lot of the Honda people out there tend to use chipped standard ECUs like P28s and things like that. But I've opted for a standalone, mainly due to the fact that this car did not come with an ECU in the first place. So to run a Honda ECU would have required swapping wiring looms over to injection model looms and stuff like that, whereas I think the standalone option is significantly easier in that regard. So my thoughts on anyone wanting to turbocharge a D14 is by all means go for it. I would certainly not tell you to not do it. I would probably say that it's worthwhile opting for some mappable ignition. I think the carbs themselves were fine. I don't think I had any fueling issues with that as far as I can tell from the driving and the data that I saw. With the turbo that I've got on this car and was running on the previous setup, it's a GT 1752 from a Saab. It's a very, very small turbocharger, so even with the D14, full boost was achievable at fairly low RPM, which makes the fact that I didn't have mappable ignition even worse, because you're at much higher risk of high sort of Pmax events at low RPM. I think if we had a turbo that was bigger and spawned a bit later, probably would have lasted a bit longer. On my path to getting this injection setup running, I sort of went in a few stages. So once the D14 was removed and the D16 was fitted, I basically refitted the carbs that I was using previously, and basically with the standalone went for a spark only setup using one of these injection spec distributors. So this distributor here is an injection spec model, and I basically ran it with spark control only. I was actually very, very surprised how easy it was to get that running, and if I'd known how easy it would have been, I definitely would have sort of fitted that spark control while I was still running the D14, and that is what I would strongly recommend to anyone. The distributor, you don't need to use most of the wiring for it. So these injection distributors have 3 VR sensors in them. You've got a 24 tooth wheel, a 4 tooth TDC wheel, and a single tooth sort of cam trigger. For this setup, I've used just the 24 tooth wheel, and I basically cut one of the teeth off to make it a 24-1, which works very simple. So you've basically got a power and ground to the distributor, 2 VR sensor wires, and a tacho signal. So very, very basic. Things like 4 wires all into that distributor. And all you need then to run spark only is a like a manifold pressure signal, and that's all you need really. The fueling requires a few more sensors, probably twice as many. It's twice as much work to go from spark only to spark and fuel as it is to go from fully carbed to spark only. In terms of the failure of the D14, basically after taking it out for a spirited drive one day, I came home, noticed quite a bit of sort of smoke and steam coming from under the bonnet. It was driving absolutely fine at the time. Opened the bonnet and there was quite a lot of blow-by smoke coming out of this valve cover breather. So different engine, but basically out of this breather here on the D14. Did a compression check, 2 of the cylinders. I think it was 1 and 3. Very, very low compression, which after sort of running a carbed turbo car, I had a strong idea what that was. Took the engine out of the car, basically stripped it down and found that I'd cracked off 2 chunks of middle ring lands from those 2 cylinders, which, judging by the fact that I couldn't hear any knock, fueling was okay, car was nominally running fine. I think it's probably just due to the fact that the cylinder pressure was just too high for those pistons to handle. Didn't seem to do any knock damage on top of the pistons, but certainly not ruling out knock versus high Pmaxes. Sort of 2 separate potential issues there, both of which would have been helped with mappable ignition. But since the turbo was fitted to the original engine, so that was, I can't even remember now, March last year, maybe. It's now November 21. So we're talking sort of a year and a half of running. So same turbo, same manifold, same intercooler. But most of the turbo bits are the same as they have been. Gearbox is the same as previously, so it's a cable clutch, manual gearbox. I've not really had anything in the way of issues with this setup. eBay turbo is still going strong. Not had any, obviously other than the D14 failing, I've not had any reliability issues. This D16 has been an absolute trooper. I've put about 9,000 miles on it in the past. Well, probably year, 14 months or so since I had the D16 in it. And again, it's been absolutely fine from a reliability point of view. And it's so much quicker than it was standard. I would say at the moment I've not actually had it dynoed, so I did all of the mapping myself. So I couldn't put an exact figure on it. I'd estimate it's around 200 horsepower, running about 12 psi boost. These D16s are pretty good in that regard. I think I probably could push it a little bit higher if I wanted to, but I've opted for a fairly conservative tune because this is my main car, so it does get driven most days. And for the sake of 10, 20, 30 extra horsepower, it's not really worth the potential headache if it was to go the same way as the D14. So I think I'll wrap it up there for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to subscribe and all that sort of stuff if this sort of thing interests you. Hope to make a few more videos about this car because I know quite a lot of you have been quite interested in it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.